Hello and welcome. Bluepoint Leadership Development and BLR Learning are excited that you've joined us today for the second in our four-part webinar series on the leader as coach. Today is session number 2, Earning the Right to Coach. My name is Julie Henry, Director of Client Services with Bluepoint. Our guide today is Greg Thompson. Greg is a keynote speaker, author, and executive leadership coach with a passion for developing the greatness in individuals and organizations. As president of Bluepoint, Greg leads a talented group of professionals who design and deliver challenging educational experiences that accelerate the development of leaders. Greg is a co-author of several books, including The Master Coach. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Julie. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you today. We have a very large group. For many of you, as Julie mentioned, this is the second in our series on Leader as Coach. We're also joined today by a large contingent of new attendees, and so I want to welcome you to this webinar as well. One of the core principles that underlie all of these webinars is the idea that most leadership happens one conversation at a time. And if indeed that is true, that if we are going to have a bigger and better impact as leaders, and we're going to develop as leaders, one of the key things that we can do, one of the most important things we can do, is to increase the quality of our conversations. And if we look at this idea of coaching, we can engage in formal coaching relationships and conversations, very, very important. But we also can simply be more coach-like in everything we do through the course of the day. So as we look at this idea of earning the right to coach, I would really encourage you to keep the thought in the background is how many conversations am I having every day that can be improved? Can I have conversations in which people leave more inspired, leave with a new idea, leave recommitted, maybe they leave with doubt, maybe they just leave with question? In some way, is the conversation that they're having with me having a positive impact on them? Today, we're going to look at this idea of earning the right to coach. There's a hard truth in coaching, and most coach training programs unfortunately avoid this. And the truth is this, is you can have all the coaching skills in the world. You can have the niftiest coach process. You can ask just the right questions and have the perfect insights. And if you have not earned the right to coach, you may as well save your breath to cool your porridge. The hard truth is that every one of us can be fired as coaches mid-sentence, and we don't even know about it. I would really encourage you to think about this idea of coaching and the person you're having the conversation with, metaphorically, that they've got a remote control in their hands, and they can click that remote control off at any time. They can make eye contact with you, they can look like they're engaged, but the core truth to coaching is this. It is only coaching as if the other person is a willing participant in the coaching process. So we're going to spend this time we have together here in this webinar exploring how we earn the right to coach, how we ensure that the other person welcomes our coaching. The second principle that we need to consider as we look at this idea of earning the right to coach is how we look at the world, how we look at people. And we call this at Bluepoint the coaching perspective. And it's really this idea that we don't look at other people as problems to be solved or things to be fixed, but really we look at other people as being resourceful, talented, and fully capable of making their own decisions. This is important because they know whether or not we see them as something that needs to be fixed, or whether or not we see ourselves as catalysts for their growth and their learning. One of the hardest parts for especially leaders in organizations, even very, very successful leaders, is to make this transition to this perspective where they are no longer the expert. They are the catalyst. The coach is a catalyst for other people becoming the expert. So seeing other people as being the expert, I love this statement here. The person being coached is the expert on becoming the very best version of themselves. So our agenda here today is packed full of things that I hope are interesting and educational for you as well as we walk through this idea of earning the right to coach. We're going to look at authenticity and values. We're going to look at the idea of intention, self-esteem, courage and coaching. I think is a critical idea. Accountability, a word that's often used in organizations these days. It has a big role to play in this idea of coaching. Self-mastery and the gift of choice. And lastly, the idea of us, coaches, being a work in progress. All of this is based on the 3C model. And the 3C model, I would really encourage you not to look at this as a specific step-by-step way of coaching, but as a meta model, a way of looking at coaching from a high perspective. What are the 3 big things we need to attend to if we want to become coaches? What are the things that we need to be aware of as we're developing it? The first one is the idea of character, and that's the dimension that we're going to explore further today. In our next session, we're going to explore this idea of connection. How do we really connect with others by seeing the very, very best of them and helping them become the very best version of themselves? And then the last session, we're going to look at this idea of conversation. The conversation is the prime tool of the coach and of the coaching relationship. There are 2 key outcomes of every great coaching session: insight and action. I'd really encourage you, as you think about your conversations, are these the products of your conversations? Do people learn something and do they do something about it? So if you look at this idea of coaching and the coaching conversation, in our last session together, we're going to take a deep dive into the idea of how do we create insight and help people take action. But today, it's all about character. It's all about who we are. As we start this section, I'd really encourage you to look around your organization and look at those people that you believe you would willingly accept them as coaches. My guess is they are men and women who stand out in some way because of who they are inside, because of the nature of their core character. So think about it. What are the qualities does a person need to really earn the right to coach you? I'm often asked the question when I do speeches and talks on this idea of coaching is, well, Greg, how do you coach the uncoachable? And there's a hard truth for all of us, myself included here, is that as we look around our organizations, our teams, our communities, and we look at people that we say are uncoachable, the hard truth is this. Maybe they have chosen not to learn and grow, but that's pretty unlikely. The hard truth is that it's not that they don't want to be coached. We just haven't earned the right to coach them. They have not chosen to be open to our coaching. So let's look at this idea of the authentic coach. And it's my thesis that if you look at this idea of authenticity, you really need to understand and look at this idea of values, personal values. Because your values drive your behavior. How you act, how you coach, how you see other people, very much based on your values. I thought we would take some time in the webinar, just do a very brief exercise on values. So if you would want to grab a piece of paper and a pencil or some way of recording some choices you're going to make. In many Bluepoint workshops, we have people choose the values that are most important to them at this point in their life and their work, and to explore the impact of those values on their leadership, on their coaching, on their interactions with other people, on their interpersonal skills, and the like. And this process takes a while, but I'm going to do an abbreviated version of that experience here with you today. On your screen right now, you're going to see a whole list of values. And I know this is not going to do justice to the difficult choices you're going to need to make here, but please, if you would just do your best to try to select the values, try to select values that are most important to you at this point in your career, in this point in your work, in this point in your life. Try to select 5 of those words that really are important to you. They're probably all important to some degree, but which 5 really jump off the page? Which 5 are probably things that are non-negotiable with you at this point in your work, at this point in your career, at this point in your life? I'm going to give you a minute or two just to make those selections. Now, as you look at your selections, I would really encourage you to be thinking about a couple of questions, a couple of answers to these questions I have for you here. How clear are you on what's most important to you? And why might that be important? How would these values show up in your leadership, in your day-to-day work with others? Are you functioning in a way that we would call authenticity, where you are functioning consistent with your own most important values? Would other people know what your values are? So if you look at this idea of values, I love this quote from Rhonda Britton. If you want to know what you're committed to, look at your life. So I would really encourage you to be thinking about this idea of earning the right to coach, authenticity, and values as really being part of this idea of showing up as an authentic coach, clear on his or her values, understanding that the other person will have their own set of values, and honoring both. So if we look at this idea of values, I have a set of values that are unique to me. You have a set of values that are unique to you. I'm amazed at the diversity in any kind of a team or organization, the diversity of values. First of all, as a coach, we need to honor that and actually see that as the mystery of working with teams and working with individuals. People know the regard in which we hold them. If we give our particular values more weight than others, then people will also know that. We need to recognize is that we are coaching through the lens of our values. We also need to recognize is that others, when they understand their values, and a lot of the work that we do as coaches is to help people surface and identify what is important to them. What are their values? What are their passions? If you look at a lot of coaching programs, they spend most of their time trying to help the other person sort out, okay, what's your goal? What is reality today? What are all the options that you might have, and how are you going to achieve that? Now, there's a very important linear way of thinking there. But if you look at really what our role is as coaches, it's really to help other people find that passion that's burning inside them and then throw gasoline on it. Now, there might be a step-by-step process that would help do that. But at its very core, great coaches become catalysts to help us find out what's important and then bring that into our work and into our lives and into our leadership. There's another interesting dimension about this idea of values. We at Bluepoint did a survey a few years back just asking people, what values do you look for in a coach? What values do you most appreciate? And here's the result of our survey. First and foremost, it wouldn't surprise you, honesty and integrity. Second, accountability and responsibility. Tolerance and open-mindedness, learning and development, challenge and achievement. Lastly, compassion and caring. So there's an interesting dilemma here for many of us. If these are the values that people look for in a coach, what if these might be important to us, but they're not core values? Unfortunately, I often hear from folks, well, it's just the way I am. I'm this way as a coach, and the people I'm coaching have just got to take me as I am. Authenticity is not about being stubbornly stuck in one frame. Authenticity and coaching is really about making a commitment to other people's way of learning, other people's way of seeing the world, and other people's way of developing and growing. So if we look at this idea of the coach's values, every one of us, even if tolerance and open-mindedness is not a big value for us, we can become more tolerant and more open-minded in service of the people that we're coaching. If compassion and caring is not a particular value for us, we can, in service of the people we're coaching, become more compassionate and caring. At its very core, values are about understanding who we are, but also recognizing that to be a great coach, there are some behaviors that are associated with other values. Maybe these aren't values that we carry naturally, that we need to understand and exemplify if we're going to be great coaches. The second module I'd like to explore with you is this idea of intention. What are your intentions? What are your intentions as a coach? I thought before we explored that, I thought we just would look at this idea of what is a poor intention? What does poor intentions look like? I want to fix you. I want to get this off my chest. I want to show you how wrong you are. The interesting thing about our interactions with other people is that they know our intention. And every one of us has done this from time to time. Every one of us has entered a conversation, really wanted to fix the other person. They know this. Every one of us has sat down with somebody and wanted to get something off our chest. They know this as well. Every one of us, have, myself included, and this is one of my favorites, is I want to engage in a conversation. I want to show you how wrong you are and how right I am. All three of these demonstrate poor intention, and we cannot coach from that intention. One of my favorite quotes from Benjamin Disraeli is this: most people die with their music still locked inside them. And inherent in this is the intention of the coach. It's really this idea, and I introduced this in our last webinar, that coaching is an act of faith in others. And if coaching is an act of faith in others, which means we have faith in the person we are coaching, they will know this as well. They will know that we are not trying to fix them. We're not trying to show them how smart we are. We're not trying to change them into some small version of ourselves, but we really are seeing them at their very best and seeing us as an instrument in helping them become that best. Module number 3, self-esteem. Really? This often gets some quizzical looks when I raise this idea that self-esteem is very important for a coach. At Bluepoint, I'm honored to work with probably 40 or 50 of the finest leadership coaches on the planet. Every one of those coaches has a high degree, a healthy degree of self-esteem. Healthy degree of self-esteem. So just as we explore that a little further, before we explore that a little further, I'd like to do another exercise with you. Very shortly here, I'm going to put up on the screen a list of your natural coaching strengths. This time, I'd like you to select 3. I'd like you to read through these natural coaching strengths and select 3 that probably are most prominent for you. Just your first impression. If you look at the ones on the screen, what I'd like you to do is just select 3 that really stand out for you. Do you relate to other people? Is empathy one of the strengths that you have? Are you expressive? Can you bring meaning into conversations? Are you resourceful, problem solver? Are you naturally a learner? Are you naturally curious? I'm going to give you just a moment here again to select the 3 that are most important for you. I'd like you just to focus on that slide again there for a moment. My guess is that every one of these strengths spoke to you in some way, but there's probably 2 or 3 or 4 that just come off there. These are the significant muscles you have in conversations, in interactions with others. My intent on doing this exercise with you is just to remind you of all the gifts and competencies and strengths and qualities that you do have. This very much is the role for us as coaches as well. And so my guess is that every person on this call has been able to see how uniquely equipped you are to be a coach. And it's my hope is that you can use that and to build your self-esteem a little bit in some way. A couple reasons. One is coaching can be a very difficult, challenging journey. The topics we explore, the interpersonal issues involved, the emotional connections involved, it can be a tough journey. And so one needs to feel good about themselves, feel confident in that process. But probably most important is this, is that coaches need to feel good enough about themselves to make the conversation all about the other person. Coaches need to feel good enough about themselves to make the conversation all about the other person. A coaching conversation is not a 50-50 deal. A coaching conversation is all about the other person. I'm no different. If I don't feel good about myself, I will make, even in subtle ways, I'll make the conversation a bit about me. I'll want to show the other person how cool I am, what a gifted, smart, insightful coach I am, and the like. We need to subordinate our own needs temporarily in the coaching conversation. And to do that, we need to feel good about ourselves. So I would really encourage you to be thinking about this as coaches. As you invest in yourself, your self-image, your self-worth, your self-esteem, you are doing a service for those that you coach. Module number 4 is about the courage to coach. This one has great personal meaning for me, primarily because of my belief that the coach himself or herself is often the limiting factor in the conversation. It's not the person that they are coaching. I like this particular image, and it's this image of a person standing out there on the edge. You've probably seen a motif that is used very frequently for leadership development programs. You'll see maybe a silhouette of a person climbing up a mountain, and it's often used in leadership development. I think it's overused, this idea that we are on the way up to the top of a mountain somewhere. I can tell you the metaphor that is more meaningful to me personally is this metaphor. Can you move out to the edge? Can you be at that place that is the scariest and still engage in the conversation? Why this is meaningful for me is that I'm a rock climber. I'm also terrified of heights, absolutely petrified of heights. And it is something I've always struggled with. I can tell you it's well worth it. The climbing, I get such a thrill and a feeling of accomplishment of it. It's something that's very important to me, but it never goes away. It is always there. So the metaphor of looking down and dealing with that fear is much more important for me than about this idea of looking up. So can you coach out on the edge? Do you care enough about the person you're coaching to endure the difficult aspects of the coaching conversation? Because there can be despair, there can be risk, there can be disappointment, passions, unmet goals, dreams, unanswered questions. If you like certainty, a lot of coaching conversations don't end up with certainty. I believe that we as coaches need to stop being the person that is limiting the coaching conversation and be able to take it out on the edge and understand that it is not all smooth sailing and can be a very difficult process. I'm a downhill skier as well, and I do apologize now for bringing in metaphors that are personal, but they do have meaning for me. By the way, this is not a picture of me skiing. You would see somebody at that height in the mountain standing there with skis crossed and knees shaking. The idea of fresh tracks, though, is what this metaphor is meant to portray. Fresh tracks to a skier is heading down the mountain, powder snow, no one in front, and no one ever have been in front before. So this is a time when the skier has chosen to go and pioneer, to be the first there, to go into that uncertain territory. I think this is the metaphor for coaching on the edge. I think this is the metaphor for the great coaching conversation. And we need to have the courage as coaches to push out into new areas, uncertain areas. Quite frankly, if you're having a conversation with somebody and it sounds like it's an old story, it's an old story they've had with many people before, you're probably doing them a disservice by allowing them to continue that conversation. You're probably having them dig that victim rut deeper and deeper and deeper. I would really encourage you to look inside yourself and to see what do you need to do to take the risks, to move the quality of your conversations out onto the edge. Accountability, module number 5, a double-edged sword. Accountability this word is used extensively in organizations today. I think it gets a bad rap. I think it's used inappropriately very often within organizations. 3 things. If you tune your ears to this, you'll hear 3 things in organizations very, very frequently, especially if there's some kind of problem. They're underperforming in some way. Number 1, we need to drive performance improvement throughout the organization. Number 2, we need to hold people more accountable. It is this idea of holding people accountable. It's code. What they really mean is we need to find the underperformers and punish them or get them out of the organization, get them off the bus. This is a very unfortunate definition of accountability. We honor people when we hold them accountable. What we're saying is you are important. What you commit to and what you do is important. Think back on the first time anybody held you accountable. You were your first paper route. You were the line chef at a McDonald's. You had your first team leadership role. In some way, somebody held you accountable. That's a good feeling. What we need to do in the coaching arena is to shift this idea of accountability into the realm of this is how we honor people. And for coaches, quite frankly, this is how we serve people. Now, there's another element to this, and that's the element of feedback, because feedback and accountability are inextricably connected. And I'll speak more about that here in just a moment. There are 2 big questions for all of us as leaders in organizations. And the 2 big questions are this. Do you care enough about your organization and your business to hold people accountable for the outcomes they agreed to deliver? This is one of the characteristics of a high-performing organization. People care enough about the business, care enough about the organization, and care enough about people to hold them accountable for the outcomes they agreed to deliver. And secondly, and this is critical for us as coaches, do you care enough about others to share with them the information they need in order to change? I have had the great honor of coaching many, many successful leaders, and every one of them can point to a time when somebody shared with them a hard truth, something that other people would not, and somebody cared enough about them to confront them in some way. Are we doing that in our conversations? Here's what happens in organizations, and this really is what I call the leader's conflict cycle. Somebody does not meet our expectations, or there's interpersonal failure. These are the two buckets that most underperformance fall into. Somebody doesn't meet our expectations, or there's some kind of interpersonal failure. What are we? We're disappointed. We become then very frustrated, and as our frustration grows, we end up being disillusioned with that person. Then it matters, and then it'll pop up in some way, and we get mad, we get angry, and so that anger typically shows itself up in some kind of conflict with that person. It just bubbles up and blows up, or alternately, and maybe worse, is that we just don't ever trust that person again. There's pervasive distrust. We write that person off. That person is never going to be a high performer in our team. Obviously, when you look at this cycle, if we as leaders can come right back to that disappointment, that step, the disappointment step, and interject feedback at that point, we can change history. We can change the frustration, disillusionment, and anger that will come out of that cycle when we continue to allow that to exist. When we look at this idea of accountability, though, what happens is we first often go to, okay, how can we keep and make other people accountable? When the most powerful thing a leader can do, and quite frankly, the most powerful thing a coach can do, is model accountability. As to what does it really look like? I own it, being very clear on the fact that, yes, I've got it, I own it, I am taking responsibility for it, whatever it is. I act on it, which means I am also responsible for choosing and creating an execution process. And thirdly, I answer for it. Look around at the great leaders, the great team leaders, and they're always doing this. They're talking about, okay, what do I own this. I'm going to do something about it, and I will account for it. And I will account to my subordinates for it as well. This is how we model accountability. This is modeling accountability. Michael Armstrong wrote, the ancient Romans had a tradition. Whenever one of their engineers constructed an arch, as the capstone was hoisted into place, that's that last keystone-shaped piece of rock was hoisted into place, the engineer assumed accountability for his work in the most profound way possible. He stood under the arch. He stood under the arch. Do you stand under the arch in your organization? Again, look around your organization. You'll see some leaders that are very, I call them Teflon coated. Everything bounces off them. They're always kind of bobbing and weaving and staying out of that accountability beam. There's others that will walk up and say, I've got this, I've got it, and I'm responsible for it, and I'm accountable for it. This is how we model accountability within organizations. If you look at accountability, as I mentioned earlier, feedback goes naturally with that. When we are accountable, we need to recognize is that receiving feedback is one of the consequences of that accountability. But there's a dilemma with feedback. When you think of what are the most difficult conversations to have at work, many times it's giving feedback. Most of us as leaders, we struggle with this to some degree. Interesting. One of the conversations that are most significant for us, as I mentioned earlier, was in fact receiving feedback. So I would really encourage you as a coach, if you can weave this idea of receiving a different perspective into the coaching conversation, you are doing the person you're coaching a great service. This, though, has an emotional price we pay to it. Think about this. If your computer tells you your hard drive is nearly full, what is your reaction? However, if your spouse is telling you you are driving too fast, what is your reaction? Well, I can tell you, if my computer tells me that my hard drive is full, my likely response is going to be this: thank you. You got my attention. I am concerned. I'm going to take some action. And quite frankly, I'm thankful because you've given me this notice beforehand before everything went sideways. My spouse tells me I'm driving too fast. What's typically going to happen? Same information, telling me something that is ahead that I might want to correct. There's an emotional spike. I'm defensive. I'm reluctant to take action. I could be resentful. The difference on these is intention. We know that the computer that has no intention other than somebody's programmed it to be helpful to us. The other one is all we're concerned about is whether or not we're being judged, whether or not we're being criticized. I share this with you because there's always an emotional dimension to giving feedback and receiving feedback. So for the coach, what does this mean? Can you hold and make somebody else accountable? Can that happen? No, you can't. But I believe that the coach has a tremendous opportunity to do so. At Bluepoint, we believe that if something doesn't change, if somebody doesn't commit to something, some kind of action, then it's not coaching. It's just a conversation. And so the role of the coach often is helping the talent make that shift from intention to action. So how do we do that? How do we help people make that shift? There are many ways to do that. There's one particular process that we use at Bluepoint that I just want to share with you because we found it particularly effective in really helping people close that gap. We all want to do great things in life. And through the coaching process, we often identify what those great things are. But a good coaching conversation doesn't stop there. A good coaching conversation goes into, okay, what are you going to do about that? So often we start out with this idea, what specific outcomes are you seeking? What are you actually looking for? So you want to become a better coach. What specific outcome are you seeking? Then a specific outcome to that might be, well, I really want to see other people performing at a higher level because of me, learning deeper because of me, having their careers accelerated because of me. So it's helping the other person really getting clear on what specific outcomes that they are seeking. And then in Bluepoint, we call it going back to go forward. Most programs that look at project implementation and change and such go immediately upon, okay, what are the resources, the timetable, who do you need to involve in the program, et cetera, how are you going to measure it? We really think you need to go back first of all. Okay, you've decided and determined what your target is. Why is this significant? What does this mean to you? If you want to become a better coach, what does it really mean to you? What does it mean to your team? What does it mean to your organization? What does it mean to your customers? What does it mean to your family? And it is by helping the other person get really grounded in the significance that fuels the growth all the way through to the action. Ignition, what's the most potent first step? Breakthroughs, what key shifts will keep you moving forward? Accountability, who is responsible for what? And to whom will you be accountable for what? As we look at this idea of authenticity and earning the right to coach, we need to recognize is that if we are going to be seen as somebody who can engage in conversations that really matter, we need to be able to insist that people who have conversations with us, if they identify something that they want to do, that we are going to stand out because we're going to be the person standing there saying, okay, what are you going to do about this? Why are you going to do that? To whom are you going to be accountable in service of that person? Number 6, self-mastery and the gift of choice. In our Master Coach program, we do an exercise where we invite the participants to craft a credo, a 5 or 6 word credo that really serves as a foundational principle for their approach to coaching. And we get some wonderful credos come up through this process. When I was leading a program about a year ago, a wonderful leader participant, her name is Trish, she came back with this credo. And the credo is this: there is always a choice. There is always a choice. So when you think about this, when you think about the idea of there's always a choice, we become the master of our own ship. We recognize that all we have to work with is our own behavior. We recognize is that we can make choices in life that are good and not good, but we cannot make choices for other people. So as we do this as coaches, as we become masters of our own ship, we really model becoming masters of our own ship for others. As we allow the people that we coach to blame others for their misfortune, for having the conversation around what is wrong with everybody else around them and why that impacts them negatively, we are doing that person a disservice. Oftentimes, coaches call themselves, I'm going to be a sounding board for somebody else. I really dislike that term. A sounding board, you sound like you're like a scratching post for all the organizational complaints and managerial complaints, and ain't it awful within my organization, my boss is so bad, and the like. That has no place in the coaching conversation. Certainly, people are flawed and other people are flawed. But in the coaching conversation, all we get to do is to help the person who we are coaching take full, masterful responsibility for their own work, their own lives, their own choices. I believe that we choose an optimistic bias. We can choose this optimistic bias. And what an optimistic bias is for the coach is that regardless of the circumstances, we believe that we can help the other person create a tomorrow that is better than today in some way. Create a tomorrow that is better than today in some way. And it's not just being really Pollyanna-like, but it's about making the choice that we are going to master as many of our own circumstances as we can to create something special. The last module I want to share with you is we call it a work in progress. We are in the coach training business. We love to work with leaders throughout the organization at all levels, from individual contributors to CEOs, to help them become more coach-like in the work that they do. And so when you look at this idea of developing as a coach, I'm convinced you never get there. You never get there. It really is a journey that we're on. Even those wonderful men and women we look at and say, man, he or she is a great coach. My guess is they're simply ordinary folks like us who are making a choice every day to get up and work towards being a great coach, doing the kind of things that great coaches do. I believe that really it is very much a career-long journey. The thing we need to continue to ask ourselves, and the question I think that needs to be running in the back of our minds, is not do we get the credit for what other people do, but really, are we the ones that are responsible for the high performance and career acceleration of others? Is that who we are in our team? Is that who we are in our organization? Is that who we are in our community, in our family? So here's a model you might want to look at in terms of thinking about how you can develop as a coach and the kind of things you need to be you need to attend to. Number one, always your attitude. How do you see other people? Do you see them as resourceful, talented, quite willing and quite able to make their own best decisions in life? Or do you see them as something that needs to be fixed? So I think we always need to be working on our attitude. The practices. Coaching is a craft, and it is a craft that we all can learn. It is a set of behaviors and practices that we know, and it's by being more intentional about these practices and behaviors where we are able to share that craft with others. And it is a set of skills. Interpersonal skills are important. We boil these down into three main areas in Bluepoint. We think that coaches need to learn to listen and listen at a whole new level. They need to think differently, and they need to speak differently. So if you think about this idea of developing as a coach, I really encourage you to focus on your attitude, the practices you exemplify every day, and what skills you are developing to help you become that person that others really value as a coach. And you're the only one that can do it. In coaching, we encourage self-assessment. We ask people, what's working? Where are you stuck? What needs to change? I think we as coaches need to ask ourselves that as well. What's working as a coach? Where am I stuck? How might I change in some way? And the very best way to learn to coach is to coach. The very, very best way to coach is to get out there and engage in conversations with other people that have a positive impact on them in some way. And every one of us has an opportunity to seek out those conversations, to increase the number of those conversations, and to look at those conversations not only as an opportunity for that other person to learn and grow, but an opportunity for us to learn and grow as well. I'd like to thank you for listening to me today and engaging in our exercises. I'll now turn it back to Julie.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks so much, everyone, for all your questions. We will get to them in just a minute, but before we do, I wanted to chat with you a little bit more about the Bluepoint coaching series. And this is a coaching series that actually involves 3 different coach training programs that are all based on the same model that Greg referred to today. First in this series is our core program, which is the Leader as Coach. It's usually delivered in a 2-day format. This is the gold standard in coach development. It's a practical, highly experiential workshop designed to help leaders excel at coaching others for high performance. Second in the series is the Powerful Coaching Conversations. It is a 1-day program that really does provide leaders with a strong foundation of principles and practices around coaching. And the result is really to allow them to have more meaningful conversations with those they work with. Third in the series is our Executive Leader as Coach program, and it has a very similar agenda to Leader as Coach, but it also helps participants to understand how they can create a coaching culture throughout their teams and organizations. All 3 of these workshops are based on the 3C coaching model that Greg talked about today. This model is slightly different than other models you might be familiar, other coaching models that you might be familiar with, in that it is not just focused on the conversation, the coaching conversation. We take a much broader look with our model, and the first C is around character, and that's really what Greg has been talking about today, really earning the right to coach someone. The second C is around connection, creating partnerships for inquiry, learning, and change. And finally, we obviously are going to get to conversation, and that's really about engaging in a dialogue that opens up possibilities and pathways for the person being coached. Our clients seem to appreciate having one coaching model for all levels of leadership within their organization. And all these programs, all these 3 coaching programs are designed to be adaptable to client-specific objectives and culture. We're really proud to have partnered with some of the finest companies in the world to create custom versions of our coaching programs. At Bluepoint, we also offer a number of different post-workshop tools to help participants to apply their learning back on the job. And we're very excited about the newest of these tools. We have several micro e-learning programs that really enable participants to more easily absorb and retain information by offering short, focused lessons that are sent to participants 2 to 3 times a week for several months following the workshop. We use a sequence of videos, podcasts, surveys, and assignments that help to refresh and deepen the understanding of the workshop concepts, reflect on, help the participants be able to reflect on their current leadership practices, and really make real sustained change in their day-to-day behavior. If you'd like more information about any of our coaching programs or our new micro e-learning programs, you can visit our website at bluepointleadership.com, or you can email me at juliehenry@bluepointleadership.com. Now, let's get to your questions. I know there were quite a few come through during the webinar. And Greg, are you willing to answer a few questions? I think we still have a few minutes left before the top of the hour.
Yes, happy to answer any questions that the participants have.
Great. So the first one is, I want to coach my team members, but I don't even know how to start a coaching conversation. Can you give this person some advice?
Sure, certainly. And it is often it's an important question, and it's a great question. How do I start the conversation itself? Ideally, if we look at a coaching conversation, coaching relationship, the very best is to get invited in. And the more we show up in a coach-like way in organizations, I will tell you this, the more often we'll get invited into the conversation. People will come to us and say, listen, can you help me explore this particular issue or idea or challenge or problem in some way? So that is obviously the one of the best ways to start the conversation. But we also can offer to help a person with an issue, with a challenge, with some type of an opportunity that they're facing or a new project, simply by going to them and saying, listen, I understand you've got this major issue. I'd be delighted to help you explore it. I'd be delighted to have a conversation with you around that and to help that person through it in a coach-like way. Another way is simply, and this is probably one that you'll do very frequently or could do very frequently, it's really about making the shift in a conversation. So you're in a conversation, and the person asks you for some advice, and you give them that advice. And then you shift towards being more coach-like right in the conversation. And this is an art for the coach-like leader. And so it's shifting from the person getting some advice from you to shifting to ask them, okay, what are you going to do with that advice? How can you do 10 times better than I ever could do with that advice? What do you really want to do with that advice? And it's making that shift into being coach-like. Another one that is often available, it's a little more challenging, and that's when you give somebody some tough feedback. A lot of us as leaders are responsible for giving people some tough feedback from time to time. But the really good coach-like leader is agile. They're able to, in one moment, give some really tough feedback to the person and then pivot. And in the next moment, extend that hand and that offer of coaching. And so there are many ways to initiate a coaching conversation. I think at the end of the day, your intention is overriding. Almost any way you try will work if the other person knows that you're going to have that conversation with them because you want to be helpful to that other person.
Thanks, Greg. That's very helpful. I have a question here from someone who, well, I'll just read the question. How do I start a conversation with someone who's not coachable or someone who does not want to be coached? How might I engage in a conversation to explore that? Any advice for that situation?
Yeah, I can. It's a very tough situation, and it may just not be solvable. It may not be solvable because something has happened so that this person does not see you as a coach. And the only way I've ever seen that to be successful is addressing that issue before the other issue is addressed. In the conversation, address the issue is there. Is something to the effect of asking the other person what you need to do so that you can function as a coach-like leader with them. What is getting in the way? What do I need to do to be able to earn the right, really, to have that conversation? And until that is dealt with, and people are very responsive to that. When we ask people, like what's preventing you from trusting me? What do I need to do differently? I find that people are very generous in their responses to that.
Great. Thanks, Greg. That's helpful. Last question. I want to become a certified coach. Can you recommend a good coach training company?
Yeah, fortunately, there's a number of really good coach training organizations, good coach training companies out there. I don't know them all. The ones that I like are CTI, the coach training company. They great organization. Neufeld, Hudson, Erickson. These are 3 or 4 that come to mind. These are really good organizations. Quite frankly, many of the Bluepoint coaches were trained by these organizations, and they're great training programs. Now, of course, Bluepoint also is a coach training company, but we're a different kind of coach training company than these. They're not competitors of ours at all. What these organizations do is they take a broad approach to coaching. They equip a lot of people to be life coaches and other kinds of coaches as they go through. And it's also like it's a many-month commitment to become that professional coach. We're different. We work primarily inside organizations. We offer highly experiential 1-2-day workshops that are focused on helping leaders at every organizational level become better at helping other people perform at a higher level, learn at a faster rate, grow their careers in some way. So our focus is a lot different, and our processes, in fact, are different as well. But these are fine organizations.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. I think that's all we have time for today. So I just want to take a minute to say thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. It's been a really great session.